Good evening, friends, and welcome to Insight. I am your host, Pat Gagliardo, and I have a fascinating hour planned for you this evening. Tonight, part one of a two-part series on UFOs. But first, remember when writing to me at Insight, Post Office Box 425, DeWitt City, Connecticut, 06351, you must include a self-addressed stamped envelope, a photograph, preferably a single-person photo, and up to 2 questions. I am enjoying your letters, so please write or type your questions on a separate sheet of plain writing tablet or plain parchment. Some of you are requesting that I will answer your questions privately by writing back to you. All mail is answered on this program. You may request that I disclose the information by initials only, a different first name, town, etc. And you can also contact me by dialing 203-886-9429 for a private session. And now, for the next 2 weeks, because of the enormous amount of information that we're going to present to you about UFOs, I won't be able to answer your letters or your phone calls. You can call in with questions about UFOs. And now, let me introduce tonight's guest. To my immediate far right is John White. John White is a well-known, internationally known author. He is editor and educator in such fields as consciousness research, parascience, and higher human development. Mr. White is the author of The Meeting of Science and Spirit, Pole Shift, A Practical Guide to Death and Dying, and many others. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master's of Arts in Teaching. Mr. White is internationally known as a researcher of the UFO phenomenon, and he will share with us tonight what's it all about, ALFI. A-L-F, meaning alien life form. Dr. Ralph LaGuardia, who is to my immediate left, is an internist with the Wyndham Hospital and has a private practice in Mansfield, Connecticut. Dr. LaGuardia has had a UFO experience of his own at the age of 8 while he was living in New Jersey. His interest grew in the UFO phenomenon while he was in college. He also joined MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, 1.5 years ago, and he volunteers his services for MUFON. To my immediate right is Lt Larry Fawcett. He is the author of Clear Intent, the UFO Cover-Up. He is on the board of directors for MUFON, and he is the tri-state investigator for the UFO phenomenon. He joined CAUSE in around 1978, which is the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. And to my immediate left is attorney Robert Bletchman. Bob has a private practice in Manchester, Connecticut. Bob joined MUFON in 1981. He is the public relations director and also serves on the advisory board for CAUSE. Bob will also share with us tonight a look at international law concerning ETs. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a fantastic show for you tonight. And if you're looking to call in now at 1-800-300-TV26 to speak to my guest. I'm going to start with you, John. I want to know, what was your interest? How did you become involved in the UFO phenomenon yourself?
I became involved just by being a kid when international headlines were being made back in 1947 about a crashed flying saucer being recovered by the Army Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Force in New Mexico. I was about 8 years old at that time, but I still have a vague memory of the excitement that caused. And then the story was reversed by the military, and they then claimed it was just a crashed weather balloon. But public interest, and my own, was excited then, and over the years I've continued to get more into the subject. I've spent 30 years now researching it in various ways, along with other paranormal phenomena.
We're going to get back to that, because I want to ask you, not only for me, but for the viewers as well, if that may have prompted Hangar 18 and things of that nature. So we're not going to let go of that. Hopefully, if time warrants, I'd like to get back to that with you, John. Thank you. And you, Larry?
Well, my interest in the phenomena grew out of a sighting in 1965 during the summertime in the town of Manchester, where I saw a very large object come down and hover over an electrical substation off of Alcott Street. This was a very close-up sighting. Prior to this sighting, I had no interest in the phenomena whatsoever. I believed what I read in the paper and what the government was saying about UFOs, that they were figments of people's imaginations. And here I saw with my own eyes, which convinced me
And being from Missouri.
Yes, that there was something out there. And from that point on, became history with me. It was just a goal to find the answer to this thing if I could.
You became also involved for Tri-State, exactly meaning persons who have maybe had an experience, could they contact you, talk to you about it?
Yes. During the early years of my investigations into the phenomenon, I belonged to several civilian UFO organizations, the National Investigating Committee on Aerial Phenomena out of Washington, then with QFOs, Dr. Hynek's organization in Chicago, and eventually ending up with Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. Which
and we're going to talk about that as well, taking certain governmental agencies to court and winning. And to my immediate left, Mr. Bob Bletchman, attorney, and yours?
And name is Bob for these purposes.
Okay.
But there is a connection between the attorney title and I think my activist interest in UFOs. I can relate to the subject in terms of recall back to about 1950 when I read a book by Donald Keogh, who was disaffected with the Air Force's position, and he was instrumental in forming one of the first biggest groups called NICAP. And he wrote a book, but at age 18 when I read it, it doesn't quite, I hadn't gelled in terms of myself growing into some philosophy of existence. I hadn't been grounded in a worldview. And when next it became consequential to me, this subject coincides again to the lawyer title stuff, was at law school in 1965 is when I went to law school. And I found by beginning to do some serious reading and taking from the pages of books by purportedly intelligent people like Mr. Fawcett and his excellent book, the UFO cover-up, originally called Clear Intent, I remember it by that name, became clear that something of a grand consequence was going on. And here I am in law school dealing with evidence, and I bring to the task of understanding what's going on those structures of a lawyer as he looks at all that's put on the plate and doesn't accept it all. And you bring to bear the critical task of analysis. The final outcome led me to this place, though, where, as with Stanton Friedman, who suggests that there may be a lot of other things happening of profound interest within the whole of the UFO phenomena, but there is one aspect which cooks the whole subject for me, and that's, as Stan says, some UFOs are somebody else's spaceships. That's conclusive, and the evidence supports that.
Which we will talk about.
Okay.
Thank you. And Dr. Ralph LaGuardia, and your interest?
Well, my interest began as a child in New Jersey. I had absolutely no interest, and similar to some of the other fellows here, I had a daytime sighting at the age of 8, where I was sitting alone among these factories where my parents lived, and watched a disc hover above a factory and then take off in an oblique direction at a pretty rapid speed. At that time, I'd never even heard of flying saucers. I had no interest in it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't go running in the house to tell my parents because it was part of my reality at the time. Being a child, it didn't seem anything out of the ordinary.
Being in New Jersey.
And being in New Jersey, you see those kind of things.
It could have been anything.
Right, who knows? I was lucky to get mugged while I was watching. But after that, I actually had recurrent dreams as a child of flying in a bubble, and then in college had a very vivid dream of when I was camping out one time with 2 friends in southern New Jersey, of walking between 2 farmhouses when a cone of light came over me and sucked up everything within it. Although not being very religious at all, I was totally terrified. And at one point in my dream, my feet were above my head, and I was holding onto a small shrub trying to not go up into this craft where I thought I was surely doomed if I went into it. And just in a desperate effort to keep from getting sucked up into it, I screamed that I believed in Christ, just and the thing dropped me in my dream. But it was a dream that haunted me for years. It was so vivid, not like any other dream I had ever had. And I slowly began reading about UFOs, as many of the fellows did here, and have acquired a pretty large collection of UFO books. And over the years, my interest in it grew, and I realized that a lot of the things I had experienced were classic UFO type experiences. Then I had the good fortune to move to Connecticut and meeting up with Larry as a patient.
Which I really want to talk about, too. You know that I have an interest in the field. That's how, it's a bizarre set of circumstances, how I met both Larry Fawcett and Robert Bletchman. It's a very bizarre set of circumstances. The way I met them just shouldn't have happened. We drove up to New Hampshire with a bad tire in the car, and I mean, it was just a whole rigmarole of circumstances. I want to ask a question, and I want an answer from all of you on this. Do you honestly believe, or is there anything to support the fact that persons who have had some sort of UFO involvement, whether it be of the first kind, the third kind, just a visualization, that everybody or certain persons meet, that it's inevitable that they will come together? I'd like to get some views on that.
You're talking like Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Perhaps.
where there was that urge to go to the mountain. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it don't. I've run into several incidences like Bob, you and I, and I've heard other stories of that, but it doesn't happen all the time, though.
Yeah, I would suggest this too, Pat, because so many people have experienced UFOs, and because there is now so many conferences like John White's conference coming up October 9 and 10, I think, in North
Which
Haven.
we will talk about.
That persons, the polls showed maybe 11% of everybody has had a sighting, and the polls indicate that most persons believe UFOs are real, even though there's a popular perception that they don't, but the polls indicate quite the contrary, that if persons came together like me and you and Larry, just mere statistical happenstance might also account for it, not necessarily invoking, driven by some mystical commonness.
But there are cases where people who apparently are abductees are manipulated, controlled,
Right.
or driven to meet other people. I can name 2 marriages, in the one in Connecticut, one in Massachusetts, where husband and wife are abductees and who say they just had to meet each other and get married because the aliens wanted that to happen.
And what about, too, the changes that take place in the abductees' lives? I mean, for instance, guests that are going to be on next week, the compulsion, the overwhelming need and want to. I think she had a fixation with glass, if I remember correctly, and things had to be all of like crystal and glass. And do you find that that happens in some of the cases that?
In some unique cases like that, it did, yes.
Well, why do you suppose
Not
that
all
is?
the cases. That's the baffling part of the phenomenon. It's not all the same. You know, there are some intricate things that occur, and sometimes they don't. So.
Now, John, you've written books. You've written at least 3 or 4 books just in the UFO phenomenon itself. I want to ask you, you yourself, exactly how do you see yourself in the UFO phenomenon, in as much as not only the belief or disbelief, but the whys, the what-fors, the whos, and how comes?
I'm a communicator, professional communicator. I write, I produce a conference, I lecture about a wide variety of things which we can describe as paranormal phenomena or higher human development or the interaction between the human mind and the environment. UFOs are a big part of that. I'm interested basically in understanding the nature of reality, and the UFO phenomenon defies our conventional understanding of reality. It raises questions about the limits of science. It implies new principles of nature that current science does not understand or even recognize. It's one of those hard facts that just may topple a scientific worldview, and out of that we will get a larger, deeper, more comprehensive understanding of the nature of reality. I'm very much involved in that, and so for me, UFOs, well, I'll say that I believe UFOs are real on the basis of my reason, my research, and my personal experience.
Hold on to that thought. And when we come back, a real close look at some of the evidence, and we will be discussing this with you, and you can call in and speak to any one of my guests, in-state and out-of-state. Please dial 1-800-300-TV26, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. And before we go to the lines, please be patient, callers. I know that the lines are jammed. I do have a very important question to ask each and every one of my guests, and I'm certain you'll also wanting to be hearing the answer to this question. John, I want you to take a stand How do you feel about the UFO phenomenon, really?
Okay, really, UFOs are real, but I think there there are several distinct explanations of groups of UFO cases. There's not a single phenomenon that will explain them all.
Thank you. Larry?
After 30 years of looking into the phenomena and dealing with the government, I believe that a conspiracy was put into motion with the 1947 crash of the Roswell disk, and that put into motion the secrecy which surrounds the phenomena for the last 40 years. And that secrecy is the government withholding that UFOs are real and that they have in their possession alien bodies.
Thank you. Robert?
Yes, I adopt John White's position that the UFO phenomena certainly reflects more than just alien spaceships. However, my area of interest in the thing that got a hold of me was that latter position, namely that some UFOs, as Stan Friedman says, are somebody else's spaceships. And the very best case in invoking what lawyers call the best evidence rule, the best evidence of a thing is the thing itself. Our government has, since 1947, in place flying saucer and alien beings, and they have, as Larry Fawcett has indicated, gone about their business of covering that up and intimidating witnesses to the extent of threatening lives of civilians who came upon the scene.
Thank you. Ralph?
Well, I agree with all three of my fellow guests here, even a lawyer, which is unusual. But I think that clearly there's from a scientist's point of view, there's something going on, and it seems to be accelerating. Over the years, there were sightings, and the encounters became more intense, and to the point where there's abductees, to the point where there's thousands of people who claim to be abductees at the present time. Clearly, they're not all lying. There's a lot of fraud, and there's a lot of people who are quacks involved, who get involved in the movement.
That's in anything.
Right, and that's in anything in the movement, but they're not all lying. And there's a string of truth there. Whether it's an interdimensional phenomenon or visitors from another galaxy, I'm not sure. No one really knows that, but they do exist.
Thank you very much. Now, those of you who have been waiting so patiently on the lines, it's now your turn. Go ahead, Mark, from East Hartford, you're on.
Hi, how you doing?
Good evening.
I have a few questions.
Okay.
The first one would be, do you think the government is in contact with these aliens, and are they, like, trading information? Like technological, spiritual, stuff like that? I'm just asking everybody in general.
Okay, well, we'll let the best one answer.
Well, there again we deal with rumors. I haven't got fact on that from information that has come to us through the years, that the government has been allegedly exchanging technology. Some of this is the spin-off, which you've heard me say on television many times, of stealth aircraft, again from the crash at Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947.
A point I'd like to add also, there is some direct evidence of communication between aliens and government officials, and that took place in Holloman Air Force Base. It's either the late 60s or early 70s. There's a man named Robert Emenegger, a noted documentarian, and a personal friend to Richard Nixon and a major campaign contributor to him, who acquired through the Pentagon a Mr. Shartle, who was in charge of audiovisual in that particular facility, film which was going to be included in a documentary which was produced and later returned to the source because it was required, but it was viewed by both Emenegger and Shartle, who contend that they saw the flying saucer land at Holloman Air Force Base, a being get out, the whole thing clearly with all kinds of advanced preparation because there were camera crews all the way around, there were helicopters staged in the area, and if I recall correctly, both civilian and military personnel approached the being who got off the craft and escorted him to some distance. Now, in regard to the caller's question, has there been communication? If that event took place, obviously, when they went off to wherever they went off, they talked.
Certainly.
I have to back Bob up on that because I did see the letter from Nixon when I was at Emenegger's house. He did show it to me, and it dealt with Ehrlichman being the liaison between Nixon and the film company that was going to shoot that documentary.
You said you had a second question. Go ahead, Mark.
I read Mr. Fawcett's book, and I thought it was a pretty good book, Clear Intent.
Thank you.
Also, I have a question about, do you think they are, like, among us right now? Do you think the government has allowed them to, like, you know, learn from us being, like, in disguise, maybe?
To answer that,
Men in Black, maybe, I guess you could say, maybe also?
Well, there again, I have no physical proof to present to you to say that it is occurring. Again, we've heard the stories of aliens, per se, walking among us, but nobody has the actual proof, and it isn't in the government
somebody
documents
does.
either, yes.
Somebody does.
Somebody does.
We don't have it yet, but somebody does.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mark. Go ahead, William from New Haven. You're on the line.
Yeah, I'd like to know how many reported sightings and abductions were reported in Connecticut.
I don't think anybody can give you a round figure there.
We don't have any hard figures. I would guesstimate over the last year there have been dozens of sightings.
Are they in any one particular area of our state?
The northwest corner seems to be one of the hottest areas for sighting, up around Torrington and Winstead.
If you can extrapolate from national figures, Gallup poll said about 15 million Americans, and that was published, I don't know, half a dozen or so years ago, successive polls, believe they've seen UFOs, and I'm sure Connecticut is reflective of that statistical distribution. So how many over the period of Connecticut UFO experience and how many in the last year? Those numbers we don't know, but certainly lots and lots of people.
Last month, Ralph and I handled a couple that came in our section, the northeast section, began to have sightings up in the Willimantic and that area
South
there.
Windsor area.
South Windsor area.
Okay. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Glenn from Old Saybrook. You're on the line.
Oh, hi. I was wondering how I could get some information about CAUSE or any other organizations. Yeah,
you can obtain information about CAUSE by writing CAUSE, care of P.O. Box 218, Coventry, Connecticut, 06238.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And those of you who are waiting for us on the line, please continue to be patient. Hi, and we're back, and we're going to go straight to the lines. Go ahead, Rich from Voluntown. You're on the line.
Hi. I'm calling, I guess, basically in support of what Mr. Fawcett has said in his book. And I'd like to recount an incident that occurred when I was in the Navy in 1965. We were up at the base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I came out of the hospital, and it was getting on towards evening. We just changed the shift. And some friends came and said, hey, Rich, something's landed down the parking lot just outside the gate. It looks like a flying saucer. So we grabbed our cameras, and we all ran down the road. The alarms were going off. There were all kinds of flashing lights, police coming from everywhere. The Marines went down there. By the time we got there, we weren't able to go across the access bridge from the base over to Kittery. But the base special police were there. As I said, the Marines were there. Most everybody that wasn't doing anything else was there. And later we found out that the police chief from Kittery and the police chief from Portsmouth were both there. We took pictures of this, and then later the next day we were told by some intelligence people from the Air Force nearby at Pease Air Force Base that we had to turn over all that film, which we did. And never heard any more about it. But I know that since subsequent to that event, then at Pease Air Force Base, they have had several incidents where some kind of vehicle went up and down the runway at 5,000 or 6,000 miles an hour, stopping completely dead at each end and then going the other direction. They tracked it on the radar, and I talked to some of the guys that were in the Air Force who said they had been there at the time, and that also was hushed up. Pretty interesting, and it looks like they're...
Yes, in fact, that's in the book. One of the police chiefs from around Kittery or that area was stationed at Pease Air Force Base at this specific incident that this gentleman is talking about. Yes, and had told us about it, where the object came down over the boundaries of the base, and as it did, it knocked out all the lights. All the lights would explode, all the light bulbs along the base exploded.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing that story with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Red from Hartford. You're on the line.
Hello. Last year I was, at this same time, I was in Westbrook, Connecticut, and I was doing an abatement job with another company out there. And in the back there was a few ponds, bass ponds, and we decided to go fishing in the back, a few of us guys. I went to the further ponds way in the back, and as I'm fishing, I look up, and about maybe 200 feet above me was this disc object. It was just hanging there for about good 20 seconds, just hanging there. And all of a sudden, it was boom, it was gone. And after all this happened, I went to my friends. I said, "Do you see anything in the back there?" Because you couldn't hear this thing. It was totally silent. And everybody says, "No, we didn't see it." My question is to the gentleman I'm looking at right now, is that how come the United States keep this all undercover? That's my real question.
Why are they keeping it undercover? Is that what you're saying? Well, again, I have to say from my experience in the 40 years of looking at this is the reason for the cover-up that I believe, this is what I believe in, is that they're trying to learn the technology. And this has been the reason for the cover-up in the last 40 years. Again, this is my opinion. From the technology I see that they're coming out with today, such as the stealth fighter and aircraft, if you look at that thing, it's shaped just like a UFO if you look at it head-on. You talk to engineers and that thing shouldn't even be up in the air. It's aerodynamically crazy. But yet this thing flies, it hovers, or reaches speeds. We don't know the top speeds it reaches. But this is what I feel. I feel that the reason for the secrecy has been the technology, learning of the technology.
Thank you very much, Red, for your phone call.
Pat, may I add something to
Certainly.
that? Certainly. If the modern UFO era began in 1947 with this now famous crash at Roswell, New Mexico, it seems to me that there were perfectly good, legitimate reasons by the U.S. government for clamping a cloak of secrecy over it then. After all, it was only in 1938 that Orson Welles had his radio program, The War of the Worlds, which just scared the daylights out of a lot of people. So no responsible military or civic official would want to announce to the world,
that's understandable
UFOs
at that
are
time,
here, right?
But not.
But why does it continue? That's
exactly.
That's what is really intriguing, and the speculation is, and this is strictly hypothetical, is that over the years the government, military, or some amalgam of that has actually made contact with one or more extraterrestrial civilizations, and there has been some sort of technology transfer that has resulted in not just the stealth, but what are now being reported
back into the late 47 and 48 was that dish that crashed in Roswell was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and placed in a hangar which somebody named 18. And
the base is at Dayton, Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah, at Dayton, Ohio, right. And this is where the story came out of Hangar 18. Actually, there was a building 18 at Wright-Pat. There wasn't a Hangar 18.
It was a building 18.
That's correct.
Supposedly, though, that's where the
story came from, yes.
The Army Air Force and later the Air Force had a facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton which was dedicated to advanced analysis of materials.
Right.
So that is probably why the retrieved pieces of the crashed flying saucer were taken there. Also, it appears that several bodies were taken there as well. However, later, at least one of the bodies apparently went to an Air Force base in Florida, just south of Miami. I've forgotten the name of it. No. Anyhow, Jackie Gleason reported to his wife that President Nixon, who was a good friends with Jackie, actually took Jackie to his Homestead Air Force Base, just south of Miami, and showed Jackie Gleason the frozen body of an extraterrestrial.
Wow. Just a little Jackie Gleason footnote, too. I was culling the pages of a biography of Jackie Gleason. It may be the great one, a very recent biography by a world-eminent biographer. And he provides that Gleason was absolutely convinced that the government of the United States was covering up. First thing I do when I see interesting people, I check the index out and look under UFOs, and there it was.
Gleason also was an avid subscriber to Just Cause, too. So
well, that's good to hear, too.
He was very interested.
Go ahead, John from Weathersfield. You're on the line.
I guess my question is to all four panelists. In 1990, something caught my interest in the paper, and that was that 6 United States Air Force intelligence agents from Germany went AWOL. No one knew where they were. There was a very secretive search for them, and they were found in Gulf Breeze, Florida, where there were some UFO flaps. They were told to, the police arrested them, and they were told to not talk. They were all given honorable discharges, which was quite strange. And I guess my question is, has anyone interviewed either the people that arrested them or any of those 6 Air Force intelligence people? They pretty much came out with the one interview that I saw that said UFOs are real, and you better believe in it.
I would comment just briefly. I saw a repeat on the Fox Network show Sightings, I think it was just last Friday, a segment going back to that particular incident with the principals involved. What they provided got them off the base was a Ouija board which said, go do it. And I think the caller's intimation about the absurd response of the government in terms of this wasn't AWOL. These guys were out forever. They were intending not to go back, and they were given a polite discharge. In my mind, the government has always been terribly concerned with cases when they got too hot. The Gulf Breeze case got too hot. A stratagem, perhaps, to dampen public interest would be to throw out some apparent kooks into the scene,
Absolutely.
let them grab the headlines, and people will stop worrying about the saucers that Ed and Francis Walters and other good people of this community have been seeing.
So you're saying you think it was a disinformation
I
move
certainly
by the
do.
military?
Only because it made no sense the manner in which the government ultimately treated these.
It's definitely of interest.
Thank
What do you want to say about that UFO?
You've been very gracious to put the address for the conference on. If people are interested, they can write to me at the address on the screen, and I will send them free information. Basically, it is a weekend of presentations by researchers and abductees such as Travis Walton, who was in the movie Fire in the Sky last spring, Bud Hopkins, world-famous author of books about alien abductions, Dennis Stacy, who is the editor of the MUFON Journal, will talk about other cases of government and military retrieval of crashed flying saucers. It'll be a real full weekend, and people will have the opportunity to question and interact with the researchers.
Well, it certainly sounds like something you don't want to miss, if at all possible, to make it. Go ahead, Pat from Clinton, you're on the line.
Hi, how are you today?
Good evening.
I just had 2 questions. One was, and both are for any of the panelists, do they know of any studies that have been conducted of UFO abductees being followed by researchers to determine whether or not they become more or less aggressive or passive over a long period of time?
I would say Bud Hopkins' research material on the abductees, he would be the person to ask that question. It's too bad he's not here, because he's done most of the work on the abductees.
That'll be the next time.
I can comment briefly on the work of a Connecticut resident, Dr. Kenneth Ring at the University of Connecticut, who's done a study of UFO experiencers, and what he's found is that they oftentimes show the emergence of psychic abilities after their experience. They also show a more spiritual outlook in their lives, and yes, they become more active in the sense of working for a better world.
Did you see that nice little grin I got over here? Go ahead, Debbie from Vernon, you're on the line, and thank you, Pat. Go ahead, Debbie.
Hi, I guess my question was similar to the one just before me, except that I'm just curious, do you think that people are being abducted and then being breeded with? Do you believe? I read that. It's really disturbing.
I didn't
Breeded
get
with.
Breeded with?
Breeded with.
Breeded with, or being bred with, to make another race?
I would suggest the reader pick up Dr. David Jacobs' book called Secret Life. Came out, I guess it's a little over a year ago. Dr. David Jacobs is a professor of history at Temple University, and interestingly, this past May, I think it was, New York Times ran a piece about the fact that at Temple University, where Dr. Jacobs is a tenured professor of history, the head of that department has nominated Dr. Jacobs to a full professorship based singularly upon this abduction research. And one of the outstanding findings that he makes in Secret Life is that central to the whole of the abduction phenomena seems to be interbreeding, crossbreeding, alien genes and human genes. he wasn't the first to make that finding, but he's the one to put a larger focus on it. Perhaps it was Bud Hopkins in his book Intruders who first touched on the interbreeding.
Thank you. Ralph, could you expound some?
Yeah, clearly, I mean, the aliens seem to be interested in genetic material of various types. I mean, the cow mutilations have been purported to be from aliens as well, considering the fact of the dissections being almost laser-like, with bloodless dissections found in the field, and then looking at animal organs, as well as almost every abductee reports the same analysis of their ovaries or their genitals with fine needle-like instruments inserted there to remove samples. So aliens clearly seem to be interested in our genetic material. There have also been scattered reports over the years of aliens on crafts at first, and then interbred alien-human type beings witnessed on the craft that seem to be the product of breeding between aliens and humans.
What do you suppose is the reason behind that? You think it's alienation that's dying out or something?
It could be they need our DNA for some reason.
Dr. Mack wrote the introduction, and he's going to be one of the presenters at John White's conference. He's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and he won a Pulitzer Prize, did a biography of the mind of Lawrence of Arabia. And Dr. Mack in the introduction speculates as to the reason. And he says, this is speculation, guys, but it's fascinating speculation. He says they perhaps are preparing receivers. And that's used in, I guess, in the generic sense of a lawyer would, in terms of human beings having, in effect, not done a good job with husbanding life on planet Earth. That's speculation, but Dr. Mack is not only a scientist, he's also a secular spiritualist, so he invokes.
Well, I hope they're going to do a better job than what we're doing as present. Thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie from Vernon. Go ahead, Sally from Middletown. You're on the line?
Yes, I have a question for the MUFON researcher. I recently saw on one of the online computer services a news release from MUFON about an alleged UFO crash in a park on Long Island, and the police had said it was an accident, and I'm wondering if you have any more information on that.
I've read something recently on it. There's I think his name is Bill Lord, if I'm not mistaken. No, I think it's Bill Lord, out of Long Island, who
John Ford.
John Ford, close. Close. John Ford, as I understand, is an erstwhile investigator who may not be the world's most careful police lieutenant like Larry Fawcett as he would look at a crime. And I talked to Tony Junius, who's one of our top people in MUFON, and people have made effort going back to the scene where Mr. Ford said things have happened to find the burnt-out areas and the like, and none of it is reproducible. So it's best left as a likely non-event. Something excited, stimuli occur. And if we don't know an answer, I think the human psyche wants to impress an answer upon our experience. Perhaps that's what Mr. Ford did, and he was ready to run with a thesis before having all his facts in line.
Thank you very much, Sally, for your call. Go ahead, Jose from New Haven. You're on the line.
Hi. What I want to know is, it seems to me that always the UFO sightings are always like in isolated countrysides, or you always hear that someone saw them in the desert or something. And I want to know, why is it that you never hear anybody say, oh, I saw it in metropolitan New York, or for that matter, landed anywhere intelligent like Yale or Harvard? You know, you always hear these instances of
Okay, we have an answer for you, caller. Just a minute.
One response, and I'm sure every member of the panel has another response, but if you pick up the excellent book, Missing Time, Bud Hopkins' first excursion into the abduction phenomena, he doesn't start with an abduction case. He starts with a flying saucer that landed in Bergen Park, New Jersey, a mile distant from Times Square, where millions of people live. So it's not really an experience that happens only out in the country.
Well, not only that, the Hudson Valley book, which documents all the sightings along the parkways where thousands of people were seen right outside of New York City.
But the caller said, why don't we hear about it? And the answer is the media don't give it proper coverage. Right. But there are cases. One of the most astounding cases of all time, it's been billed as the case of the century. It's happening, it is being investigated right now. A woman was abducted from her 12th story apartment near the Brooklyn Bridge, downtown Manhattan. There were more than a dozen witnesses to it have now been identified. If this case stands up to scrutiny, it's utterly astounding. And if the media do not cover that, then the cover-up extends beyond the military into the media.
Also, just one other quick point. The Gulf Breeze sightings, here you got a community which is a bedroom community, the Pensacola, which is a big southern or northern Florida city, and hundreds of persons in the small, dry community
What about
of some 6,000. But here they are, there's a city, but there's photographic evidence, there's corroborative witnesses, and it's, as John says, it's a perception that is foisted on us because the media doesn't pay proper attention to the events that happen across the spectrum.
When's the last time you heard Dan Rather give a UFO story?
Never.
John Lennon himself claimed to have seen a UFO in New York. And put it in a song.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you so much. Go ahead, George from Newington. You're on the line.
Yes. Last fall on Sightings, I had a piece of film that I had shot over a football field. I did not see the object at the time of filming, but on further review at home, it came into view on the screen, and it was analyzed by the Jet Propulsion Labs and so on, and authenticated and as a UFO, unknown. And I was just wondering, are there other people who get pieces, things on film that they don't see visually?
Oh yeah, that's happened time and time again. We've seen cases where somebody be photographing some scenery, and then when the pictures are developed, lo and behold, there's a disc in the photograph or some type of craft. So there have been other cases like that.
Speaking of sightings, what about the Guardian and the thumbprint?
In Canada?
Who do we think that this guy is?
I don't know. That's a baffling thing.
Yeah. Bob Exler, who's the, I guess, the father of the Guardian, is a rather quixotic kind of person, so one must speculate. He's in control, I guess, of whatever is coming through.
Thank you very much, George. Go ahead, William from New Haven. You're on the line.
All right, good evening. It's a very interesting show.
Thank you.
Okay, and this is for the whole panel. I don't know how many of you remember or read about the Ghost Fighters of World War II.
Oh, yeah, Foo Fighters.
Yeah, the Ghost Fighters, the planes that supposed to, the objects that supposed to flew beside the Germans and the Americans, and each side thought it was the other secret weapon. But my question is that I'm a Vietnam veteran from 66 to 67, and I was a camera out there being ready to be shipped out to Saigon to be shipped home, and I did see a UFO, all right? Mm-hmm. And my question is, how many UFOs or unidentified flying objects have been seen in World War II, the Korean conflict, or either the Vietnam War, or either the Gulf Breeze War, whatever they call it?
Yeah, we just uncovered through the archives in Washington numerous thousands upon thousands of files from the Second World War, where the night fighter squadrons going out to bomb the ball bearing factories in Germany were followed by what was called then Foo Fighters balls of light. In fact, I was able to surface a Medal of Honor winner who lives in my town in Coventry, Connecticut, who was on a B-29 and one of them raids, and had witnessed one of them balls of light came up to the plane and circled the plane and then fell into the air behind the plane and into the squadron behind it. So there were numerous reports during the Second World War, not only on our side, but the Germans were seeing them also. Right. And so were the Japanese in the Pacific Theater.
Right. But now about the Vietnam War, have there been
in the book, the UFO Cover-Up, we documented several stories out of Vietnam that we were able to obtain from soldiers that were over there that told us of the events, and then us surfacing the government documents on them after it.
Yeah, that's why I didn't report it, because I figured they would do the same thing, you know what I mean? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you, George. Have a pleasant evening. Go ahead, Victor from New Haven. You're on the line.
Hi, how are you?
Very well,
thank you. My question to any one of the men. The advancement of these UFOs, how fast they can get to us, we can get to them. You know, like our space mission, it takes us like years to get into a different galaxy. And, you know, if they're coming from another galaxy, does it amaze you how fast they get here, or do we know how fast they get here? You know what I mean? Their spaceships are moving a lot faster than ours.
What if they're bending time?
Pardon me?
What if they're bending time? Dr. Hynek used to like that theory that what we were dealing with here was time travelers, people from the future coming back in time. I wanted to expound on something that was said earlier by one of the callers, Dr. Roy Mackel from the University of Chicago, in having a meeting with Hynek and I one day, said to me, Larry, I don't know why you're so baffled about these beings that are being reported, but they're kin to us. And I said, what do you mean they're kin? He says, well, they have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and they're built like us, and they're somewhere in our evolution
chain. They're humanoid.
Yeah, they're in our evolution chain. And this is what Dr. Hynek was saying, that what we're dealing with is time travelers here.
Well, you may not be. You can also invoke the possibility that just by reason of technology, as Friedman says, science always advances by doing things differently. It's not incremental. And you don't have to go to other galaxies to look for candidate stars that might have planets that support life. There was an article appearing in Astronomy magazine about a year ago by a professor of astronomy from Harvard that says Alpha Centauri, which is 3.5 light years distant in our galaxy, very likely has planets on which are beings which have risen to the level of human technology, and that's an argument.
And their technology may be able to transport them faster than the speed of light.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget Ezekiel's wheel, 2,000 years ago. And don't touch that dial. More details right after this. Thank you for watching Insight tonight. Next week, part 2, UFO encounter of the third kind, the abduction. I'll have a Connecticut couple here who claim to have been abducted. You don't want to miss this. Remember, when writing to me at Insight, Post Office Box 425, Dewitt City, Connecticut, 06351, you must include a self-addressed stamped envelope and a photograph. I will respect and I will comply with your instructions on disclosure. Thank you so much for your wonderful compliments and your support of this program. Always think positive and act positive. Good night and God bless.